Now, I'm not one to encourage constantly rebranding. In fact, I constantly talk about how important it is to create a brand identity that's going to last a long time, so that all you have to do over time is create tweaks. But I often find when it comes to business, your business will evolve over time. Things will change, or you'll start to get clearer on your messaging. And so along with that, you may find that your branding needs to evolve with it and that it needs some refreshing. Now, the core of your branding might actually be really good. It might be really working for you and you're really happy with it. And overall, it's communicating the right message. As things in your business are evolving and changing and getting clearer, you may find that you need to make little tweaks to your branding. And that's okay, because you're still keeping that same overall feeling and vibe. You're just tweaking little things so that it's starting to really better communicate what you're trying to get across. And if there's any areas of your business that are changing, that you're making sure that your branding is changing along with it, so that your branding actually connects to your business vision and that your business isn't evolving all on its own, but the branding is going along with it. So today's video is all about refreshing your branding without starting over. Now, quickly before you do any kind of refreshes, make sure that you ask yourself why you want to do this. Are you actually going through some changes? Or are you starting to get clearer on things and you really want to hone in on them? Are there certain elements of your messaging that you really want to start bringing forth more strongly? Or maybe you've noticed one of the colors you're using isn't quite working the way you want and you just want to adjust that one thing. Be sure that the reason you want to do a bit of a refresh and update is not because you're just simply bored with it or you've seen it too much. So remember that while you're exposed to your branding all the time and you might be getting a bit sick of it, other people aren't seeing it so often. And in fact, they need to keep seeing the same thing over and over for it to start to connect, for them to start to really recognize it and see the consistency, and for you to build that strong brand identity. So before you do anything, make sure you question why you're wanting to do it. Now, the whole idea of a brand refresh is to keep that overall feeling and vibe, keep some of the elements you already have, and just start refreshing things and updating and tweaking. Some quick examples of how big companies do this. I'm going to show you a few logos and how these companies kept the overall feeling of their logo, but just gave it a refresh, just modernized it a bit. These companies have been around a long time, so as time goes on, their logo may be starting to feel a bit old, and they're just wanting to make it feel a little bit more modern. Maybe even their audience is starting to change a bit over time, because as time goes on, you know, people grow up and audiences can change a bit, so they just want to freshen things up. But they still kept feeling that vibe and that identity. So here's some examples. First of all, Gap. So this was their old logo, and this is their new one. So as you can see, they kept that same square element and they kept the same colors, but they wanted to make it feel a little bit more fresh and modern and appeal to a younger audience. So obviously there was a little bit of a shift in their business where their audience was changing, and also over time things were changing, and so they just wanted to update that, but they're still keeping that feeling. And then there's Google. So this was their old one and this is their new one. So as you see, they kept those colors because those colors that they had was the really iconic part of their branding. And when there's a certain element of your branding that becomes very iconic, it's so important that you stick with that. Trying to veer and refresh from that is going to cause a lot of disconnect. And you really have to market hard if you really want to convince your audience that this change is okay. So what they've done here is kept it recognizable, but they've just changed the font. They've just wanted it to look a little bit more modern and clean. And then KFC. So they've got their old logo and then their new logo. So with this example, what they've done is just pared back and simplified. So they haven't really made any changes, but they've just taken things away. So they've decided that their logo is a little too complicated and they want it to feel a little bit more simplified. And they've kept that really iconic element of the character. And then if you want to look at something really longer term, have a look at Pepsi. Now, as you can see, they've made a lot of changes over the years because this is a brand that's been around a really long time. But there's certain elements, if you look closely, that keep staying the same, such as they keep using the same colors, they keep using that wave line, they keep using a circle. They've only ever really changed the font style once. And so really overall, it's kept that same feeling and vibe. It's just updating and modernizing, but it's still that same feeling and it's definitely still recognizable. So how can you make little changes to freshen up your own branding? One example is changing a font. So as you remember in those examples I showed you of those big companies, one of the changes they're often making is font changes. So if you're finding that a font just isn't doing what it used to do, maybe it's starting to look a bit too dated. Maybe you've realized that your audience has changed and the font that you've been using doesn't quite fit with your audience anymore, or you're really getting a lot clearer about what fonts can do and the messaging behind it, and you've realized that the font you originally chose isn't really doing what it needs to do, then maybe just a simple font change could make the difference that you need. Maybe everything else stays the same, you keep the logo, keep your colors, keep all the other little elements, but you just change one of your fonts. Another one is changing colors. Now this is one that I would be very careful about, because if you noticed in the examples, everyone always kept to their colors. Color is so powerful. And often people remember color over everything else. I mean, how often do you actually remember packaging in the supermarket by the color? You know, oh, I like the red brand. You know, we remember color. Color's very memorable and very recognizable. And so if you've started to build really strong coloring into your branding, changing that can be very risky. But if you're realizing that the colors you use aren't communicating the right message, aren't resonating with your audience, then maybe you just need to make that change with your colors. Maybe your logo and your typography and all those other things are staying the same, but you're realizing the colors not quite sending the right message or evoking the right emotions, so you want to change the colors. Another way to do this in a more subtle way is not change all your colors. Maybe you want to keep with the primary colors you were using before, but maybe you want to add in one more color. Or maybe just one of the more subtle colors just needs slightly tweaking or swapping out. So you're not completely throwing out all your colors, but more you're just tweaking and maybe swapping one of them out. And then the primary color that you've always been using the most still stays there. Or it could be that you realize the tone's a bit off. So maybe you've been using pink, but you're realizing that maybe it's a bit too bright, too plasticky feeling, and you want it to feel a little bit more calmer, and you just want to go for a slightly softer pink. So it could be just changing the tone of that color a little bit. And yes, maybe you do need to do a complete color refresh, but remember that when you do big changes, then you've got to do a lot of marketing around that. Talk to your audience about the change you've made and why you've made it, so that they can help make that move with you and you're not confusing Another people. Great simple way to do an update is fresh photography. Photography is something that you're constantly updating and using new images all the time, but you may be feeling that your photography style you've been using is starting to feel a bit old or dated, or maybe it's getting too repetitive and you need to freshen things up, so you're getting some new photography. And that can be a great way to inject some new feeling into your branding without actually changing all those core brand elements like your colors and fonts and logo. So getting some fresh photography can be a great way to freshen things up. Okay, so updating the logo. Now, as we saw in the examples before, it's good to try and keep to the same overall feeling and vibe of the logo you had before, unless you're really feeling like the logo just is not working at all. So maybe when you first started out your business, the logo, maybe you just whipped it up yourself, or maybe you just used a cheap designer, or maybe there wasn't enough thought into the process and you just wanted something pretty and trendy at the time, and now you're realizing that you need something a lot stronger, something that's going to last longer. And so maybe by keeping other elements of your branding like your colors and fonts the same, by changing that logo, it's not such a huge change in leap because there's still some recognizable factors, but you really need to get yourself a fresh logo so it feels fresh. But remember that changing your logo can be a big change. So go back to it and question why you're doing it and if you're doing it for the right reason. Another great way to freshen things up that isn't going to overhaul your branding is some new templates. So if you're constantly creating graphics for, things like Pinterest images or podcast episodes or social media graphics, and you've been using the same old templates for a long time and it's starting to feel a bit boring and you want to freshen things up, then maybe just some new templates would be great. You're still using all your same brand elements, but you're just freshening up that look of the template. So you're creating a bit of a fresh feel. And finally, there's adding some new elements. Your core branding might be just perfect and working great for you, but you want to start adding some fresh little elements. Take your branding a little bit further. It could be some new icons, some patterns, some illustrations, just some new elements that you can throw into graphics. Start to take your branding that little bit step further, where you've got more to work with and you're growing the overall brand identity. It can be just this natural extension rather than something that feels conflicting. So I hope this gave you some great ideas about how you can update your branding, give it a freshen up without completely overhauling it. If you've got some new ideas about how you might freshen up your branding now, then let me know in the comments. And don't forget that if you want to learn more about graphic design, branding and creativity, then be sure to subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.